Thanks for tuning in to My Home is Special. The second stop on our trip is Bolivia, and this episode was a tricky one to pin down. It turns out I don't know anyone from Bolivia, or at least I didn't. My goal was to have a chat with someone from every country we're visiting, and after a lot of work, which I cover in this episode, I got this episode done. For me, this conversation was as much about learning about Bolivia as it was hearing about what was special. I hope you enjoy it. Peace. So Ian, thanks for taking time to talk with me today. Before we get started, would you mind just introducing yourself for people listening today?
Yeah, of course, I would love to. My name is Ian Vargas, and I'm an international student from Bolivia. I study at UIC in Chicago. I was born and raised in Santa Cruz, Bolivia. My dad's from Santa Cruz, and my mom is from Brazil. So yeah, she moved to Santa Cruz when she married my dad. I moved to Chicago 3 years ago. I'll be graduating in 3 weeks. I double major and I study criminology, law and justice, and psychology.
That's awesome. Congratulations. One of the things that I'm trying to do is speak with a lot of guests that I've known for a while, and you and I actually don't know each other that well outside of the one conversation we've had already. Before I share my side of the story, can you share your side of how we got to know each other?
Yeah, of course. So I have a friend that she also goes to UIC. You guys met at a Bolivian restaurant not too far from Chicago, which is funny because I was the one who took her first to that restaurant. It's funny because like yeah we went there once and I talked to her about it and now it looks like she's a consistent customer. I don't know, that's pretty cool. And I know you guys met. You were searching for someone that could basically tell you more about just like Bolivia and how's life over there. She gave you my contact, and that's how we met, from what I know.
That is a very simple way of describing what's been a long journey for me. As I was thinking about the countries we were going to be visiting on our trip, I knew that Bolivia was one of them. I also knew that I hadn't met anyone from Bolivia. And I know a lot of hip hop dancers from all over South America, but I didn't know any from Bolivia. And so I looked to see if there was a restaurant near me where I could go and maybe talk to the owner. And it turns out the only restaurant in Illinois that's Bolivian is about an hour from my house in Aurora. And back in June, as we record this, it's the middle of November. Back in June, I went out there to try and meet somebody from Bolivia. And I was talking with the owner and her husband. And at some point, after looking at me like I was crazy, they said, if you want to talk to some Bolivians, here are two right here. And he introduced me to two women that were eating lunch. And I got to talking with them, but they ghosted me. And so months went by where I couldn't get in touch with them. And 2 weeks ago, I decided I'm going to go back to the restaurant and meet someone from Bolivia. And I was talking with the owner's husband again, and he was willing to do an interview. But then, as I was just sitting there waiting for more people to come in, somebody sat down behind me, and I just interrupted their lunch and said, "Hey, by any chance, are you from Bolivia?" And that's how I met Vimy. And when she said yes, I said, "Well, mind if I talk to you for a minute?" And I literally pulled up a chair and interrupted their lunch for about 20 minutes and told them what I was doing. And she said she'd be able to do it, but life happens. And she said, "Well, I can't do it, but let me introduce you to Ian. He said he would do it." And after texting for a week or so, I spoke with you recently, and you were gracious enough to do it. So for that, I say thank you.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here.
So, Ian, maybe we can chat about Bolivia for a bit because a lot of people that are listening may not have been there and may not know much about it. It'll actually be my first time in Bolivia, and we're going to be in La Paz and Uyuni. And so far, my experience of Latin American culture, even in my own family, is that family is really close. And so I'm wondering, was it hard for you to leave for college and go so far away when you left to come to Chicago?
Yeah, it was definitely hard. I just graduated from high school. I graduate people back home they graduate from high school in December at the start of the summer. I went to an international high school, so it was expected from me that I will go somewhere where English is spoken because I've been learning English for some time. So I applied for different schools. My first choice was to like move to Florida. That didn't work out because yeah, I guess like my dad he wanted me to just like experience like being like independent and just like struggling and like fitting somewhere because I moved here. My English wasn't that great. I know that in Florida, I've been to Florida a couple of times, and that a lot of people, almost everyone speaks Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad just wanted something like challenging for me where I can just like, I don't know, become independent. And on top of that, UIC offered me a scholarship, so that's like the main reason why I moved here.
So let me ask you, is there an easy way, maybe an oversimplified way to describe the country and sort of how it's laid out?
It's divided into like the lowlands and the valleys. Bolivia is divided in 9 states. Six of them are considered the valleys, three of them are considered the lowlands. Like you mentioned, you're going to Uni and La Paz, which is like the mountains.
So that's a little bit about the way the land lays out. Culturally, are there differences between the two areas that you're describing?
Culturally, yes. Even though it's still the same country, I would say there's like significant like cultural differences. The food is very different. We all have in Bolivia local food, and the ingredients that are used like in the valleys are very different than the ingredients that are used in the lowlands. Also, just like the dialects, like the way of speaking is different from the valleys to the lowlands. And also like racially, people from the valleys they are more like indigenous, and in Santa Cruz, like you'll find more people in Santa Cruz that have like a European or Spanish descendants. So we can say like I guess people are more white in Santa Cruz.
Ima, I know a lot of people don't really talk about the cities this way, but when you and I talked, you had mentioned there are sort of three cities that play very different roles in Bolivia. And can you share a little bit about that? Because I thought it was fascinating to hear the way you described it, even if it's not how most people would describe it.
Yeah, I guess like it's just like interesting like understanding different cities on like in terms of power where like usually each country has a capital and Bolivia has one, but it's confusing which one is it. So like you want to assume that like we could say in a third world country like the most developed city would be the capital, but in Bolivia it's not. So like Santa Cruz, it's like the biggest and like the most developed city, is where like most international companies are at, and where like there's more business internationally and things like that. However, like in high school, they teach you the official capital. It's called Sucre, and Sucre is like a smaller city, way less developed. Not a lot of people go to that place. But another interesting thing is just like there's another like big city like after Santa Cruz, which is also like not as developed as Santa Cruz, but that's where like all the president lives, where like most like official buildings are located. So we could call that La Paz like Washington, where like all like the governmental like buildings are are located.
That's really fascinating to hear. I know I'll be in a couple of those cities, so I will try and check them out and see if I can check out the differences between them. When we talked earlier, you shared some of the things that make you really feel at home, and I wanted to chat about some of those things with you. One of the things that you said that was really interesting to me was that when you're home, you're able to speak your own language. And living in Chicago, where there's a lot of Spanish speaking communities, that was a little bit of a surprise to me, but you clarified and said, no, it's speaking in my own dialect. Can you talk a little bit about that for people listening?
Yeah, of course. There's just something very unique of like each language. That idea of just like, okay, like there's a lot of people that speak Spanish. You guys might totally understand what each other is like talking about. Here in Chicago, there's a lot of Mexican and Venezuelan communities, but Bolivia is a pretty small country, and especially Santa Cruz. What I miss the most is just like being able to like speak in my own dialect. I mean, I speak Spanish, but the same way that like the English from the UK and the US and from Ireland and from Australia, they're all different. I mean, you guys can still understand each other, but there's gonna be like different times where someone's gonna say something, you're gonna be like, what did he say? So yeah, even if I find like people from La Paz or other like valleys from Bolivia, like it still feels more familiar,
Mhm.
but it's still like not the same like the same dialect. Sometimes I just miss being able to just like say whatever I want in my dialect, in the way that I was raised and the way that I developed language. And yeah, I just miss being able to like express myself in that way and just like being like fully understood.
It's really interesting that you shared that because I totally understand what it's like when I hear somebody from the UK or from Ireland or from Australia or even from different parts of the US. Having grown up in New Jersey, there's a particular dialect in the Northeast, if you will, or in Boston. But the only time I've noticed it for other languages most clearly was when I was in Barcelona and I was listening to people speak Spanish in Spain. And it sounded very different than the Spanish I grew up hearing with my mom's family, who's Dominican. One of the other things that you mentioned to me that stood out was that you said Sundays are for family. Can you share a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, I guess like in my culture in Santa Cruz, like the only thing you're expected to on a Sunday is to like be with your family like the whole day, just like hang out with them. Family was just, it's just like a very like important aspect in Bolivian culture.
So what does a typical Sunday look like then? I mean, do you have things that you do every Sunday as a family, or is it just that you just spend time with each other doing pretty much anything?
Well, my family is Christian, so we'll just have breakfast and go to church, then go for lunch, just like do everything together. We'll like pick up my grandparents to go out for lunch, and then after that, we'll just like, I mean, we'll just like relax at home for some time, and then like in the evening, we'll do like something fun, like we'll go to the farm together that we had, or like we would go to the movies or things like that. Yeah, on Sunday around noon. Like all the restaurants are always like popping like around that time, and it's just like interesting. It's very different than over here. Like here, Sundays come, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do? You know?
When you think about getting up on Sundays and spending it with family, you've now been here for a couple of years, and I think you had told me previously that you haven't been home for probably a year and a half or so. Are there Sunday rituals that came with you to Chicago? Do you do things here in Chicago that remind you of home at least?
Yeah, like I mentioned before, we used to go to church, and I still go to church here in Chicago. I'm like very involved with my church and with campus ministry at UIC. I think that like I became very devoted to Christianity when I moved here. I think that like back home, my experiences wasn't great or was different, and yeah, I think there were just like a lot of like taboo topics and things that were just like not addressed by the church, and here I just feel like all those things are being addressed. I don't know. I think like a lot of doubts that I had in the past before I didn't have people that were willing to like address those, but now here there's people that are willing to like answer my questions. And I mean, when I go back home, I still go to church, but it's definitely like a different experience than here in Chicago.
Yeah, and I know a lot of South America is very Catholic, and I grew up going to Catholic school for 13 years. And not only were there things that you didn't necessarily talk about or the taboo topics, like you said, but it was just kind of understood that you were supposed to listen and kind of remember the text. And my church here in Chicago, our pastor always says you should be wrestling with the text. Like you should challenge it and you should challenge each other to make sure that your understanding is there. And so I totally understand what it's like when you go to a church that's not like that because I've been to both myself. I wanted to ask you one last thing that you talked about when we were preparing for this conversation. You said that one other thing about home that you really enjoyed was going out to eat. I wanted to talk about that for a minute because it's something I know as a college student, food is always on people's minds. But what
Hmm.
is it like when you're home and you're going out to eat with your family? Is that something that you miss when you're away?
That's my topic. That's my question, you know? I just love food a lot. I would consider myself a foodie. There's just like so many things that I just miss out, just like Bolivian food. It's just it just hits different, you know.
You said that the food hits different. Is it the seasoning? Is it the spices? Is it something about just the atmosphere when you're home?
All of them. I think that like here in Chicago, there's some ingredients that the ingredients from the food back home they just like they don't exist here, you know, because they're just like more natural. They're just like made over there for the specific type of dish that they're gonna make. Yeah. Also, just like restaurants are very like people spend hours in restaurants, you know? Like they just like sit down and they just talk for hours. So they are just like very like there's a lot of outdoor seating and places like there's even like a lot of like really cool restaurants like in the suburbs. Inside the restaurant there's kind of like things to do and attractions so that like people can they can just like hang out, have fun, like go on a little like horseback riding. I don't know, just cool stuff like that.
And so let me ask you, do you cook? Are you able to bring any of those spices back with you to Chicago and sort of hold you over until you get back home?
I do cook, but this is funny because Every time I come, I do bring a decent amount of food from back home. So it's just funny because like Hispanic cultures like that, like you open like your suitcase and there's like a bunch of chilies and just like snacks from back home. I do bring some like snacks and things like that, but like I don't think I ever cook anything from back home because I just couldn't find ingredients. So I just cook stuff I find online.
So, Ian, that is really funny. I remember being in college, and whenever I went back home, my mom would basically send me back with all kinds of food. Like I would have a bag, and I'd usually have a box, and the box would be full of food, and I would try and stretch that for as long into the semester as I could. Dominican food was hard to find when I was in Boston. And so having this the stewed chicken, the curry chicken, the rice and beans and all of that was just that's how I got through the semesters. I want to thank you for taking some time today to just share a little bit about Bolivia and the culture and your experience. I really look forward to going down there. And if it's okay, I'd like to check in with you when I get back in February.
Yeah, that sounds great. I would love to do that.
Thanks for listening to this episode of My Home is Special. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you get future episodes automatically. Go to myhomeisspecial.com for the occasional email update too. That's where links to photo galleries and a few other surprises will live. Be sure to follow KBev Photo on Instagram for behind-the-scenes footage during our journey, and it'll be in the stories. If you just want the photos, go to kbevphoto.com. There's a lot else on there to explore. For now, this is Keith, aka KBev, signing off. Peace.